So Erik Tomasi, thanks for dropping by. What brings you to Black Hat?
Just I'll stay on top of what's going on, networking, meet some people. I find that I don't come every year, but when I do come, it's just very beneficial. You meet a lot of people, it leads to new opportunities, and you just feel like you're immersed in the industry for a couple of days, and then you're a little wiped afterwards.
A little wiped. I think that it's an understatement. I think people are, they need to. Like, I find every time there's an event, afterwards you are. The week after, everybody's so quiet. They're recovering from that's true for RSA, it's true for Black Hat and others.
Or maybe they're catching up, because definitely the requests never stop. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So walk me through, you have a very interesting career, you've done a lot. Walk me through, how did you become, such a senior person in cyberspace?
I think the interesting thing about cybersecurity, because you think, look, early in our lives, there probably wasn't a specific niche. No one said it when we were a kid, I'm going to become a doctor, I'm going to become the cybersecurity expert. It was still early on. And so I knew what I wanted to do in college. I did electrical engineering degree, and I had a job in college working for IBM. A friend of mine, she was next to me, and she's like, Erik, I can probably get you a job at IBM. And that, like most things, one thing builds on another. So I had worked there, then I did some consulting various places. I went to Chase for a number of years, and it was really at Chase which was the catalyst for my career, in that I was there maybe 2 days of the job, and my manager, he said, look, we have a problem. We have about 15,000 people who are logging in from all over into our network, and they're only using their username and password. And at the time, they didn't really have advanced MFA. He's like, let's look at this DES thing or Secure ID. He goes, do the research. So I researched the market, we rolled it out, and it was a big initiative because it was across the globe at the time, and obviously Chase is much larger now, but getting the Secure ID, and if someone was in Hong Kong, and because you only get, at the time, 60 seconds, so we had some 5-minute code, so that was really the catalyst. And then from there, to relationships I developed when I finished my MBA, I went to Price Waterhouse, focused as part of the cybersecurity team, where a lot of famous people, started CrowdStrike, they worked there, and that, you just build off that. And from there, I've gone to different areas back and forth in my career in terms of both working at companies and working as a consultant, doing different things. And I think there's, like most things, there's pluses and minuses to doing both.
And Erik, it's amazing, the amazing story is that, I find that a lot. People, sometimes in all my interviews, I always ask, how do you got into cybersecurity space? And a lot of, sometimes it's by sheer coincidence. As you mentioned, you did a STEM degree, it's difficult, but then you knew somebody who happened to be in the right place in the right time. And then also what's amazing, again, is that you got into a great financial company. And it's unbelievable that what you said you were 2 days. Let me double click on that.
It's 2 days because it was a team which was evolving. They had some kind of research R&D team at Chase. They had the operations team, and they had an engineering team they had built. And I was hired to be part of that team. I guess I had broad skills, and then I think just out of random, my manager came to me. We're still friends to this day, and he's like, "Why don't you take a look at this? Because there's a problem." And I found it very interesting, And the thing I liked about it, because I get bored doing. I mean, you have people who like to do just one thing. I like that it touched everything, all our applications, differences. So that was appealing to me.
You were not stressed out though. I would be totally freaked out, because you're so new. And then you have such a large responsibility, all of a sudden, just from, when you knew, it takes you a couple of months just to figure out the lay of the land. So when you how did you take on such a large project basically?
Well, two things. One, there was a strong team in place which we could leverage. But the other, I thought also, look, it's a mess right now. It can't get worse. We can only improve it. And there were solutions at the time which did the job. And also, I felt like I'll figure it out. I think it's very important in life, and I guess it's emphasized by my mom. If you have confidence in yourself, and obviously you need a certain foundation, you'll figure it out. And even when I hired people, I always look for brain power, because I think if they're smart enough, they have the requisite skills, they'll figure it out. And interesting about this project, it was that I actually got a commendation letter from the CFO when it was done.
Wow.
From Chase. Yeah.
That's an incredible story. And so, yeah, we'll talk about, what are the attributes that you think that are required to be successful. And I'm sure you can't, you can generalize, you can't be very specific, but, one thing that just came out from this is being a problem solver, right? So
I think it's crucial. I remember when I was in college, and you're taking these. I remember I'm looking at a circuit, like how much current is. I'm like, I really don't care. But I remember one of my teachers said, look, when you're going to school, a lot of stuff you're never going to touch it again in many cases. Especially engineers, like half actually become engineers.
Right.
But what you're learning is how to problem solve, and essentially that's what you're paid to do as an engineer.
Yeah, exactly. And it's problem solving, and also it's how to learn. How to learn, how to investigate, how to uncover the information you need to solve the problem.
You're spot on. And I think about it, the people who I know and who are the most successful have strong research capability. They can look at a problem, they'll figure it out, and then they'll start to narrow down the potential range of issues, and then funnel and maybe check with someone. And I think the research and understand is tremendous in terms, and really differentiates who is really extremely successful and those who just, they're getting things done but not having as much of an impact.
Yeah, and it's on top of that, things are moving so quickly. I mean, look at you, you've done so much, but you're upgrading your skill set because you're here. So you're committed to being on top of things. But I mean, it doesn't take too long before you're outdated, right?
It's so true, and yet especially as paradigm shift, like as things have gone from more on-prem to the cloud, different SaaS solutions, different ways for access controls, you have to stay current. One of my best friends is my physician, and he talks about he's got a constant research, but last time I checked, the human body hasn't changed in a couple of years, whereas every year there's new things, new technology, what's going to hit, what's not. So I think another key part, you have to constantly.
Speaking of the human body, I think we know less about the human body than we know, how things are on Mars. There's still a lot of things to uncover. And then you mentioned you were at PricewaterhouseCoopers, right? What was it like? There's a consulting firm, essentially one of the largest four, right? So they're big projects, as you mentioned, big brand names and so on. What was your role there? Do you remember?
So I think having started my career at IBM, Pricewaterhouse was good, but at a different level, because at that time it was further along. You're dealing with more senior people, CFO, and it was very beneficial both for the people I met within the company as well as dealing with various companies. And I found, some people frown upon, like I know CIOs who lose their job, they want to do consulting, and it really depends on your personality. I like the fact that when you're consulting, you learn things at a faster clip, you see the good and the bad, and working at Pricewaterhouse gave me the extensive accelerated exposure, and especially with a lot of industry stalwarts who work there. So really, I think that pumped my security knowledge to a totally different level.
And then you spent time, working as a consultant, and you mentioned, but then you also moved into senior roles within enterprise. What was that like? So you have a very well-rounded background because you fulfill different roles, and now you also know how they think, right? Because you were in their shoes. So what was it like becoming you were a T director or manager or
I've been a CIO. CISO. And I think it really helps a lot of my relationships because I've been in a senior role with them, so they don't look at me as someone, they understand, like I can empathize with what they're going through. I like being on the corporate side with certainly some positive aspects. You have a team, you have your your world there, and you shape it, and you come to the same place every day. The downside for me is that IT and security are thankless. I mean, you could do 99 great things, and the only one which will resonate will be one. I'll give you an example. I was at one organization which they kind of hate how much of a mess they were when I went there, right? And this is a household name. They literally step over the cash when they come to work every day. So resources were not an issue. And once I got there, then I didn't realize it was such a mess. And we had made an unbelievable impact, making them compliant for various security standards. There was a lot of pressure because if they didn't meet this compliance, it impacted their business. And then we had one issue where this gentleman the start date was 9 and the store, whatever, the locations were like at 10. And one gentleman, he came 10 minutes late and respond. And walks in my office, the CFO complaining. And I'm like, look, it was not an earth-shattering issue. Like, cut us some slack. I understand it. No one paged me, so I think it's tough. And look, in technology and security, no news is good news, so it's thankless. It's just expected.
So I'd like to, peel the onion a little bit on that, because I think there's always this enigma in terms of what a CISO CIO role is all about. What do they care about? Because you were one. What do they care about? What's the day-to-day look like? what are the issues they need to resolve, and more so, what are the dynamics or the kind of forces that are in play when you are that senior and you have to responsible for for staff and then for the infrastructure and so on one side, and then you have to report to the board and the stakeholder on the other side. It's a lot to unravel.
It is, and part of, I've also been the president of the New York chapter of SIM, which is the largest CIO organization in the country, and a lot of CISOs as well. And it's interesting to me, and I'll come back to your question, how many people I speak to, and there's really like a mental health aspect to it. Because in the role, like you said, you have two stakeholders. You have your team being effective, are they meeting the business demands? And then you have senior management who's got a whole different perspective. And in most places, unless it's intrinsic to the business, they really don't care about technology. It's just a cost center, they don't understand it, they just know it's problems and it could hurt them. Security's different because it's risk and it's high profile, but I think, it's a tough spot being and even, CISO's even worse than CIO in terms of you look at tenure and how short it is. And it's tough because they have so many demands. I mean, I remember I was at one department with our CEO of this one organization, and they went around the room, everyone was discussing, here's marketing, here's our plans, and then like every single thing they spoke about, and yeah, we're gonna work with Erik and his team to do this. And I'm like, I understand you have to support the business, but the workload compared to our team, it's a bit of misalignment there, so a lot of CI, they just stress.
Yes, so Erik, I'm glad you brought it up. So why don't we talk about this? Because mental health is only recently, I would say in the past several years, is becoming something you can talk about, because it's been around for a long time, but, a lot of the response was like, toughen up, this is their environment and so on, but you can see that a lot, it's impacting cybersecurity professionals as well. There's, like fatigue around, dealing with alerts and so on. So what's your take on it? Where is the industry going in terms of dealing with this type of issues? Because unfortunately, unlike like security incidents, a lot of it are you're not able to detect those. You can walk around, look like you're everybody else, but you have major issues inside, and it's not something you can detect.
No, and it's a very complex problem. And unlike people like simple answers, but a lot of times it's not. And I think in a case like this, it's really going to have to be a multifaceted approach, where you have to, where possible, I'm a big believer, outsource certain skills which are going to be difficult to build up within your organization, say security monitoring, shore up your endpoints. But I tend to think in general, most organizations tend to focus too much on the technology aspect. Like, obviously a lot of vendors here, our product will solve all your problems, and it could help. But I think the people and processes part are even more important, and they tend to be underinvested in. And I'll take any day of the week, I'll take a strong security culture over a good technology solution, because you could have a great product in play, and if someone does it clicks inside out, it's game over. So I think that's really important. But the mental health aspect, if you look at some of the recent studies, cybersecurity is one of the most challenging areas. Look, I recently lost one of my friends who was a pioneer in the space. He was part of the founding members of Foundstone. He saw Gary Bahadur, who passed away, and he had some health issues, but a key aspect I felt was just burnout, working out too much. So I think it's important to try to strike some kind of work-life balance, make sure you're offloading what you can, and I think one positive aspect is that the shortage of people in the space is hopefully starting to come. I mean, one of the things I've noticed here, how many more women are here than compared to past security events, and I think that's very encouraging.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because they used to say that dentist was the most stressful,
high suicide rate, like them in cops.
Yeah. It seems like we're coming, to, unfortunately we're getting there in terms of the overload on people's day-to-day life, because they take that work home and they never turn off, right?
No, the demand is incessant.
Yeah. So talk to me specifically about, you mentioned the outsourcing and these gaps, and also potentially like making the investment in the people, right? How does that look like? If you had a choice, if you come back to a CIO role, a CISO role, what would you do to to make that investment and moving the needle on investing in the people?
So I think there's three parts to it. So the first, which I'm very encouraged with, is I see the overall training in organizations improving significantly. Whether you see, I'm not going to plug any products here, but the quality of the training, the examples they give, the ability to pick on an a la carte basis which modules are more relevant to you, in terms of raising the whole security awareness part, is very encouraging. That's the first aspect, the simple one. The second part is, I think it's very important, and I'll come to IT in a moment, that users themselves, that they understand, because I think there's a myth, hey, it's an IT or it's an InfoSec problem. Like, no, the best organizations who have the strongest security programs, security is important to everyone. And I think having the training geared as well on a personal basis. Hey, on your most sensitive personal accounts, banking, email, you should deploy MFA. You should not use the same password. Use a password manager. That's very important. And then the third part, which is the toughest, is the actual technology team. Making sure that you're putting people in a position where they can be successful, that they have the fundamentals, they're not getting, you have proper structure around them, the tool, and you're not, I think a lot of, it varies the problems. Some places try to do everything, there's a million tools. I mean, I've walked in environments where they had products coming up on maintenance and they were sitting in the cubicle, never been opened in over a year. So,
and it's the traditional shelfware, and it happens more than you think, right? They come out to the end of the year budget, whatever, and they purchase it, and then it was never actually projected or scheduled to get deployed. Right?
Or if it is deployed, it's rushed and it's misconfigured, and it doesn't achieve the results.
Right. So what's the day-to-day? I like to, because you've been there, done that. What is the kind of the CISO or the CIO's role? How do they manage to juggle, because it's really a juggling act, right, between all the different forces in the organization. Mm-hmm. And it's also very dynamic. So you mentioned specifically the tenure of a CISO, for example, right? So talk to me, why is it such a short tenure, and what are kind of the operating forces that they're required to juggle throughout their kind of tenures in the organization?
So I think one of the reasons is because they have, they're looked upon as the subject matter expert and leaders, they should be. But invariably, a lot of times, they don't have control for a lot of aspects in the environment. And then when something of significant happens, they're the piñata in terms of taking, the scapegoat for taking what happened. And I've seen it across various different sectors. Like I was doing work in the healthcare industry where a physician would say, hi, I'm the head of cardiology, I want to put these things on my iPad, and like, oh sure, it just because of their position, they would just get it. And I'm like, meanwhile, this is a person you need to be the most sensitive about, have the most security controls because of his breadth of importance in the organization, his access to data. So I think that's changed, but I think they're putting in a very, very difficult position.
Yeah, and as you mentioned specifically, they're being pulled in different directions, and one of them is very succinctly said, that you mentioned, is they have to be business enablers. And a lot of times it's the old dichotomy between security and ease of use. Mm-hmm. And so how are those dynamics changing, if at all, in the past several years?
Well, I think the move to the cloud and SaaS applications is having a profound impact, both good and bad. The good part is like a lot of the low ground, like just think of email, not the old exchange. The people who have on-prem exchange servers at this point, I really empathize with them, right?
Lotus Notes.
Oh yeah, that was another good IBM acquisition. But I think so. The problem, what's happening is the skill sets required are raising. So like you look at your typical Google administrator, they have about 10,000 servers they're required to support. And I think the good news with the cloud, a lot of the low-level stuff you don't have to worry about, but consequently, if you make a mistake on a misconfiguration, I mean, how many we see elastic servers which are available, if you make the consequences a lot more than it's the internal environment. So I think SaaS helps, the ability for centralized identity management, that's a big help as well. So a lot of the I'm not going to call it grunt work, but the lower time-consuming work goes away, not including patching, but I think the skill level, the ability just to set everything up, have CASB set up with Azure AD, and then also, I think a lot of times people tend to take on too many different solutions. Like I knew one organization had 3 different MFA solutions. I'm like, look, just your Microsoft shop in this case, unless there's a specific need, stick to one. So make your life simpler where possible.
Yeah, and it's almost like it's coming back to the basics, right? A lot of organizations are, depending on where they are in the maturity curve into cybersecurity, they can start with some very basic hygiene. And you mentioned simplifying your infrastructure. Mm-hmm. It's almost like a no-brainer. Why would I have 3 of the same type of solutions, right? Because now you have 3 maintenance, patching, renewals, and so on. You have to simplify that. But what's your take on, the fact that, okay, well, it's cyclical, right? They wanted the best of breed, and then all of a sudden and then it was single pane of glass, and now it's cloud environment, so everything is moving to the cloud. What are these trends like? Where are we going with these trends, like in terms of adoption and so on?
Well, I think obviously it depends on your budget, but I think the most important thing an organization needs to do, irrespective of even this question, is understand their risk profile. Like, how comfortable are you if something happens? I mean, I've dealt with insurance companies where the risk tolerance was high. We have policies, but I think where we're headed is, I do think that you're going to see a big shakeout in the next couple of years. You're going to see, like any maturing industry, you go throughout history, they tend to mature and consolidate, and I think we're headed in the same role here, where there's going to be a lot of existing current players will probably.
Yeah, I was about to ask you what that maturity, like, how's that going to look like?
I think you're going to see more consolidation with the current winners. Not to say there's not a market for niche solutions, but I'm not like Octave, right? They have a good solution, they're strong, but in a lot of cases, I know some entities that moved off it because it was an additional expense. They didn't really lose any functionality for their needs, which are different. So I think you're going to see more consolidation. And look at a lot of these licensing bundles. They throw more and more in there. They're putting more, and if you could take advantage of that and have that single pane of glass, whether it's a compliance dashboard, there's advantages to that, But once again, it comes down to what you need to achieve. But I think that's where we're headed.
Yeah, and then as a CISO, you still think that the tenure is short because of the things that happens out of their control, right?
That's a primary reason.
Yeah.
It's not because
right.
There's some instances where the CISOs move on. There's a better opportunity. And plus maybe they know something's going to happen. They want to move. What's that? I know one where recently. So, but I think.
So they're preempting.
Self-destruction.
Yeah. So yeah, it's interesting. But don't they typically get like a golden parachute? You see that all the time, where an organization got breach or whatever, and then they whatever the CISO got let go, and then they get a great position somewhere else.
Look, there's no doubt they have a lot of lives with CISO because the demand is there, and they can. In many cases, it's factors outside their control. I think the golden parachutes certainly are there. Some super high-profile breaches. I mean, I think it was Equifax, one that comes to mind. But I don't think it's the kind of golden parachute you see at the CEO level or CFO level. But I think the demand is so. I mean, I don't know. It depends which metric you look at. But there's a shortage of 4 million people in this space, and it's growing. And the skills.
But let me double-click on that one. So is it really short? Because you always have. When I graduated a while back, with computer science, I remember they were saying there's 1 million unfulfilled IT jobs, and then you look closely, their demands were so ridiculous.
Of course.
And then the pay was so low. They wanted to do a shift work, have all the skill set, and then lift things that are over 150 pounds, and all of that. And of course, there's people like that don't exist. And is it short, or is it they're not paying enough?
You raise a good point. And look, in part of my career, I've had consulting and recruiting firms where we place people, and a lot of times we would tell our clients, look, what you're asking for, let me know when you find it because it doesn't exist. It's a unicorn. But I think it really depends on the skill set. If you look security monitoring, so many people start there, and it's tough. You're looking for a needle in a haystack all day, and there's such a short, why would you want to bring that in-house? Put it to someone, they're taking threat intelligence, coupling that, certain development is still a key. But some project managers, there's an abundance of them. So I think it depends on the skill, but you're right. In a lot of cases, it's not realistic.
Yeah, and it's it's the case of the kitchen is not too small. It's for because the price you pay. You pay that amount, you get you're supposed to get a larger kitchen. So I think they're just not paying enough. I think for cybersecurity professionals. I think if they raise the valuation of those, they'll eventually they'll find, it's a supply and demand, right?
No, but it's a smart. What I've seen some organizations, what they've done to be proactive to that they've given in some cases like 20% increase. Maybe one person leaves just to avoid turnover, because obviously that can really impact performance. But I also think there's a lot of people in this space who struggle.
Yeah, yeah. So you mentioned specifically the outsourcing certain function is recommended by, as you mentioned, which makes a lot of sense. It's also the MSP and MSSPs are the fastest growing segments in security, right? The fastest growing companies. As a practitioner, as somebody who was in that shoes, how would you pick one? If you wanted to outsource a certain function, how would you go about to pick the right partner?
I think the most important thing is first to understand your requirements. You may not know everything what the end state looks like, but you should have some kind of a vision. Like, do you want this firm? Do you want to do remediation for you? Do you want certain aspects of your environment? Like, what does that relationship look like? And you may tweak it over time, but I think too many people go to market and they don't understand the requirements and they're all over the map.
And why is that? Is it they don't understand like internally what they need, or why is it so difficult to zone in on the requirements?
They may not understand the market, what's available to them. They also, I think, they may not have a good handle. I'll give you a good example. We did a project a couple of years ago in Malaysia for one of the largest telco companies there, and they had a solution in place for outsourced security monitoring. And we looked at it, it was certainly viable, and they were dissatisfied, and they went back to market to look for a replacement. We had several vendors, and it turned out they could have had Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, so you're doing security monitoring, whatever the case may be. They were such an internal mess that it was going to be very difficult for any partner to be successful. So I think you have to have your house in a certain order first, couple with your requirements, and then work with the vendor. What's this going to look like? And just adjust it. Have a baseline. Have constant calls. This is a false positive. Let's take it off the list. I've seen cases of a company we get a report every month, maybe 170 tickets, and they wouldn't act upon it. So obviously, if you're not improving, you're falling back.
Yeah. So how do you do that? You consult now with organizations. How do you? It's a good point. How do you make sure that your house is in order? Like when you come in, and I'm assuming it's for either a particular project or strategy and so on. What are the first things you do to figure things out and start mapping what the next steps are going to look like?
Well, typically, and I guess Mike just ask a lot of questions, try to understand. Maybe sometimes we'll do an assessment just to see what kind of gaps they have, where do they stand. We'll rate the gaps in terms of requirements, which is a really big issue to address and which is lesser, you can deal down the road, and try to put some structure, and then hope that, look, you're not going to maybe knock out everything in the first pass, but at least start to move forward in a positive step.
Yeah, and did you ever have to have difficult conversations? And what I say about that is and you're laughing.
All the time.
All the time. Potentially with clients, as well as when you were at your role in CRO or CISO, like because again, people don't realize how sometimes and more often than not, you have to have this difficult conversation, and it's not easy. And it's maybe that's why you get paid a lot, because you now have responsibility and you have to come back and make these difficult decisions, and also sometimes deliver bad news and make some requests that are not popular.
I think it's a critical part of the job. I remember we had to let someone go at a previous company, and the HR asked me, like, Erik, do you want to participate and let them go? I'm like, sure. And they were like shocked, like that I wanted to actually participate and let them. I'm like, look, if I don't want to be there, then he shouldn't be fired, because he should know what's going on. We should have had those difficult conversations, and it should not be a surprise unless it was just something out of the blue. It shouldn't be a surprise. And they said a lot of managers don't want to do that, but I can tell you, it's difficult, and a lot of times people obviously don't want to hear it, but if you don't have those conversations with all of your stakeholders, whether it's vendors, managers, clients, or you're doing yourself a disservice and you're limiting your effectiveness. And there's a way to do it. Someone said you could say anything you want, but how you say it, keep it constructive. I think you have to lay out what the issue is, and a lot of times maybe give them an opportunity to improve, recommendation, but you have to to do that. And I've never been one to internalize things.
Yeah, maybe do it with a smile, like there's
or keep it constructive. Here's what's going on, but this is where you're falling short. And if we don't change it, we're gonna have to move in a different direction.
Right. And then specifically with your clients, when you come back with recommendations, I'm assuming that sometimes they may have a pushback, maybe for depending on the type of project that you have them do, maybe the costs associated, maybe some changes to internal processes. How do you handle that kind of pushback?
I think your job is essentially, part of it, if you visualize, is to be a funnel. So your goal is look at the entire situation, either come back with a couple of recommendations, 2 to 3 or 1, let them know the pros and cons of each. So your goal is to simplify this aspect. So look at the entire landscape, here's what's going on, simplify and let them decide. Look, ultimately, like I've seen situations where they had a major risk to deal with and they decided we're going to let it slide. But once you convey to them, here's the risk, here's how I rate it, I think you should actually do something here, then the ball's in their court. If for whatever reason they don't want to do it, they're living it, but your job is to understand, use your expertise, here's what we see. I like to give at least 2 choices, sometimes 3, depending on, and let them decide what they think is the best way, which has different attributes. One's more cost effective, one's more difficult to implement, so things of that nature.
Tell me a bit about the kind of, in your career, like maybe successful project, things that you're really proud of, and then maybe on the flip side, maybe things that didn't work out as well.
Oof, that's a tough one. I mean, I would say,
And by the way, Eric, you're doing a phenomenal job. This conversation is completely unscripted, so if I tackle you, whatever answer you give me, it's great.
Yeah, no, I think, I may not have a specific instance, but I can tell you the attributes of things which went off the rails versus things which were successful. And look, in technology in general, things tend to take longer than you want for a variety of reasons. So I think, as I've gone early in my career, I probably put a little more buffer in terms of time, right?
So you learn the hard way that it takes way longer. So is it 2x longer, or is it 1.5x longer?
That was my former partner, who was one of the youngest Holocaust survivors. I started my career, and he said, like, whatever you do, just double the time. I don't do that way. I think it depends, because if we're doubling the time, we probably don't know. We should really think about us. Do we know what we're doing? But I think, in general, I think managing expectations. If you have bad news, let people know right away where they stand. But I think the projects have gone off the rails. The number one attribute, typically, maybe you just were met sometimes bad information, a product couldn't do something you thought. But I think the biggest issue is people. A lot of times, I took care of it, and they didn't, and I think understanding who's on the team, how much level of micromanagement do you need, but if you have a strong team from top to bottom, you can move mountains. If you have, and especially in a smaller organization, if you have a couple of big question marks, that could sink you. So
how do you do that? What is the secret sauce that? Because I'm a firm believer that a lot of the culture stems from the top. Like it's the DNA of a company relates very much to the leadership DNA.
I agree.
And as a security leader, how do you create that team, that cohesive team that you can trust and you can build on, and you can win these projects?
Well, I think to your point, look at any successful, even as a sports team, usually, as a friend of mine says, it's usually you look at the superstar, and a lot of the team tends to feed off that. And I think you have to set the example as a leader. You can't, in a lot of cases, ask people on your team something to do you wouldn't, whether it's research, put the time in, they have to see the effort, that you care what's going on. Look, there's no doubt you're going to butt heads with people. If you're creating things, there's going to be friction. But I think the people aspect is the most challenging and interesting. I always like psychology. And I think what you need to do, if you're starting to see signs of bad behavior or ineffective, you have to jump all over it. And you need to make a decision relatively quick. Hey, can we reposition this person? Is it a salvage situation? That, I think, is the number one.
And how do you notice that? Especially now with remote work and so on, how would you, a lot of people are, they're hiding behind, all the systems, reporting systems, and then, they caught a bunch of people using these mouse movers and all kind of stuff. So how do you detect that?
I mean, part of it is the business skills, are they responsive? Are they giving grades? The communication skills that are important. Part of it's the technical. Are they just giving false information, which is erroneous, which is going to sink everyone's credibility, right? And then third is, are they growing? Are they improving? That's important. If someone's new to a particular project or assignment, okay, the first time a little rough, but you would hope, like anything, any acquired skill, over time you're going to improve, and you'll be able to do it at a faster pace.
In that improvement, how do you gauge that? Again, because you're a senior leader, and sometimes you're not into the weeds. So it's hard for you to gauge, certain skill set. How would you detect that?
So it's funny because I have one colleague who recently was working at Amazon. He left, And at Amazon, one of the things he told me, we were discussing while he left, the environment, and he said they have metrics for everything. It's truly like, it like surprised me, but I guess that's why they reach that kind of scale. And I guess I don't do that, and a lot of managers don't, but hopefully you can compensate for experience. You just know in a lot of cases, in sense like, look, this should not take that long, or you should understand that. So you're using that, but I do think there's more metrics, which is probably an area a lot of people want to see in InfoSec, but they don't, is definitely an opportunity to improve. So I would have to say, maybe it's a shortcoming, but it's mainly just instinctually. Haven't done a lot, is haven't had a broad experience. And I'll tell them, look, this shouldn't have taken you 2 days to get back to them, or in this case, you should have looked here to research this. But you have to give examples. You know, I'm not maybe giving so many specifics here, but if you're working on a situation, a project, you have to tell them, here's where you fell short. You should have looked here. Look at this. And I try to give a lot of links, a lot of research, articles, specific things or examples. Here's a note, your status report. You should include this, things of that nature.
Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned that Amazon specifically measures everything, because I've heard that.
I was shocked.
You know, even the warehouses, like they map how many seconds it takes for you to get an item to deliver to a box, and then how many seconds it takes you to walk back, and then they time you. I guess that level of granularity maybe not be appreciated by the cybersecurity community. But what kind of level do you expect it eventually? Because it's coming. You know, if Amazon started, you know it's coming in our industry as well at some point.
But the kinds of examples which he gave was like how many response tickets. They had a lot of applications they had to review. This gentleman was in AppSec, and he had to look at a lot of applications where they stood, and he was gauged on how many did he approve, and in some cases they wanted to rush us to market, but there was holes, so he was led to some frustration. But it was in a lot of unconventional ways that probably me and you wouldn't think of applying metrics, which they were. You know, so I think the positive side is they're probably achieving scale better than most organizations. The downside was he was an extremely talented individual who just like put his hands up like, stop, I'm being measured. I see my man, I talk to my man maybe once a year, whatever the case, and like I'm just being measured like a robot, you know, and it wasn't satisfying to him, but I think it is coming. I mean, people want to, not just at the senior manager level to see what's going on, you know, different security metrics, but I think in terms of performance for people as well, I think it's going to start to come.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. So in terms of, you know, we touched upon it briefly about the, you know, what attributes are required for somebody to be successful. You mentioned specifically that, be able to continuously learn and so on. How do you as a senior leader make sure that your skill set is always on par and you upgrade those?
So one, as I mentioned, I'm constantly reading. I'm on a number of blogs, different things, just reading. I get an RSS reader, which is just getting constant on that part, talking with people. I'll reach out. I have a pretty strong network. What do you think about this? What's going on? Have you worked with this solution? We actually were at an event last night, and it was a company, and they said they were working with third-party management. They were working with LinkedIn, and my gentleman was right there, and we spoke. He said, "Yeah, I'm using the very good." So definitely peer references have a factor as well. And even listen to the podcast, staying on top of things, you know, all the alerts. It's just, there's the biggest difference now compared to like earlier on in my career, but maybe, you know, there's such an abundance of wealth, free information. Like if you want to learn more about Azure, there's free training online. You could, you know, you're maybe not going to write a book, but you're going to be proficient if you put the time. I think it's critical. You have to have passion. You have to have enthusiasm. And a lot of people want to come into InfoSec because they see it as a lucrative career. But if you know those attributes, coupled with the technical skills, it's going to be a rough ride.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's there's no excuse today, right? So it's not like in the past days you had to read the manuals. Now you just have to like look up on YouTube and it's a wealth of information there. You know, speaking of which, you know, what technologies do you find exciting in terms of solving some of these issues? You know, looking around at Black Hat and other conferences and so on.
Well, I think a lot of times the most, maybe not exciting, but they're effective. Like you look at the proliferation of IGA and how that's simplifying access management, how companies have less accounts. The converse to that is that your identity, maybe you had a token in the past, wasn't a big deal. Now it's becoming a target for hackers because that's where the gold is. You know, I think that's certainly one place you've seen a lot of investment in. I think third-party vendor management, it's part of a lot of compliance frameworks, understanding your partner relationships, putting a program in place around that. There's a lot of tools in that area which help simplify it. I think that's important. But I just think managing all the devices, I think you hear a lot of move to getting rid of the perimeter and going to zero trust. I think when you have a problem as complex as information security, you need to take a binary approach. And while you only see maybe the leading organizations doing it right now, some consulting firms and Microsoft, Google, for example, you're going to see more and more firms deploy more agents on their devices, heuristically manage what's transpiring, and use that and just gradually morph the whole perimeter because, like I said, people are going to be remote. I don't know what the end state looks. There may be some come back to the office, but I don't think we're ever going to go back to where we had this, this moat around the organization. There's just too many interactions with third-party vendors and services and federation that I think anything to manage that and allow you to be proactive and smart. A lot of threat intelligence is interesting to me as well because there was an issue this morning which is causing a big Microsoft 365 outage where they had part of their major update yesterday. It broke Meraki and their IDS system, and people what do we do? And then right away there's a global issue. It's impacting Microsoft 365. So the ability to understand what's going on a global basis, coupled with danger, really has changed the landscape.
Isn't it a risk? It's just like they were talking. I remember a while back saying that there's really one strain of bananas, right? I don't know if you know this, but because all we eat is just one strain because of engineering and so on. So if that strain gets infected, we're out of bananas worldwide. And I think it's the same goes for using Microsoft-based technologies, Google-based technologies. You hit once,
anything in engineering is a trade-off. So, the good news is, people can focus on a particular skill in their career, and then they'll have an abundance of opportunities. Because look, they've been number AWS outages, and then everyone is so many services go down, and so it's a great point. But I think ultimately, economics win. And I think that's going to be the driver. And I guess the hope will be they're just going to fortify it and have more redundancy in place and automatic shift. But I think that's where we're headed, for good or for worse.
Yeah, so the market conditions you mentioned are going to dictate it. But we also see regulatory environment, right? We see that compliance and regulatory being directed from the government. CMMC is a good example and so on. But it's also in the private sector. How in your opinion, is industry dealing with that, and is it good for the cybersecurity industry?
I think it's good because in a lot of organizations, they would not even care about. We did a project a couple of years ago for a data broker based in New York, and they had doing business. They were doing their data broker in the political space, so helping campaigns. And there was a law which came from Vermont, which mandated that they had to have certain practices in place. And they didn't care at all. They just wanted to check the box, get it done. We gave recommendations.
And the practices you mentioned, security practices, were under, in terms of the data that they collect.
Yeah, the kind of security monitoring they were doing, sign off for changes, all the core fundamental stuff of InfoSec. So I think compliance is good because it at least forces you to have a baseline. Especially for some organizations who wouldn't do anything. And in certain sectors more so than others. Certain sectors have strong programs because they have to, whether it's financial services, whereas others tend to be laggards, education, retail, because it's not as important. So I think compliance is important and it's a driver to making change, but by no means does it mean compliance is not means secure.
So I'll ask another question in regards to that. So is it the free market conditions are failing because you'd think that they'll see what's happening to organizations that fail? What are the tenure of organization that was breached is
205 days,
something like that.
It varies.
So why are not organizations that just deciding to do it themselves? And then also, is compliance eventually is going to increase the cost of doing business, right? Which eventually is going to boil down to consumer paying more.
Do you fly a lot? I would think so, right? If you look at, I'm using this as an analogy, in airlines, what tends to happen is that once there's a crash, there tends to be a tremendous uptick in terms of maintenance and checks. I took a MAX 8 out here, and there was a mechanic that did extra checks because of the history with that plane. I think the same thing holds true, and that so many organizations think it's not going to happen to us. It's not going to, not all, but it's not going to happen to us. And if you look how many times, once an incident occurs, whether it's because the stakeholders, they can't get cyber insurance, then you see massive investment. Compliance could be a driver as well. They may lose the ability, to handle transactions as an example, but I think it's human nature. And then that a lot of times you don't see action until something happens.
Yeah, and speaking of crashes, I mean, we see that all the time in cyber, right? In cybersecurity. The SolarWinds, Log4j. I mean, you name it. There's all kinds of stuff happening, and yet it seems like after it's on the news and people are not going home for the weekend, things kind of go back into certain status quo.
But if you look at the statistics, and I don't have anything to back this, so many breaches tend to occur on holidays, Fridays, even though most attackers, they don't work in normal schedules unless it's a nation state, but they're taking advantage because they know. And actually, when we've done some of our threat modeling, we've done our tabletops, we do scenarios where we say, okay, if something was to happen, first instance on the East Coast at 4:30, or we just try to plan the shift, and then how would we react as an organization? Because the support structure can change, both whether it's going across the globe or a different time of day. How do we handle that? So we try to account for that.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I don't know why it's always like the 5 o'clock. It's almost a joke. There's memes online, the Log4j memes specifically for how it all started.
Or early in the morning sometimes,
right.
Like on a Monday, just to really impact business, so they have to react, like for ransomware attacks.
Yeah. Do you have any particular frameworks that you like at a NIST or something that you feel it's very efficient in terms of getting to a certain threshold of risk mitigation?
I do. I'm certified, etc. I actually like the CIS controls assessment. And they've done, I don't know how they quantified it, but there's one stat, and they've used 20 control areas, now it's 18, and I don't know how they measure this, but they feel if you meet that, and there's different implementation groups, that if you meet that, you can potentially mitigate 80% of your risk. So I think for a lot, it depends where you are in your maturity, but if you're an organization which is early on in the way, I think that's a great foray. And then as you start to
80%, I think everybody would take it.
Where do I sign? Where do I sign? That would be great. And then the thing is, there's great crossworks. You can map it to more mature framework, like NIST or ISO, and then evolve. And I think, like a lot of times, we want to be NIST, ISO organization. I'm like, look, you don't. Your fundamentals. You're going to say no, no, no. Let's at least show some progress. Even though it's very technically focused, technical controls, that's a great starting point. And then from there, we can build up the rest of the program, make sure you're strong.
Yeah, it's very true. So let me ask you a couple more questions, and then we wrap.
Mm-hmm.
You're very involved in the community. You're a leader for some organizations. Like, talk to me about the SIM organization specifically. Maybe why it was founded and what's the kind of the goal for the organization.
Mm-hmm. So SIM was founded over 50 years ago, and at the time, there wasn't really a IT. Rather than security, IT was still evolving as a specific discipline. So they started, and there's almost 50 chapters throughout the United States, over 5,000 members, and it was a place, and I kind of maybe adverse, but one of my mentors, who ironically was at Chase, he told me, Eric, I used to be that you should join them, and I think it's been a great part of my career in terms of the networking, the people I've met, and they're really geared. They have multiple. There's outreach aspect, but it's really geared to be a forum for IT leaders to understand what's going on. That the discussions cover the range of topics. Could be legal issues, security, cloud. Just leadership, and I think it's a great place which offers something for everyone. But I think the challenge is, there's so many events now. Like maybe when they started was less. I remember when I was a CIO, I could go to an event like every single night, steakhouse. It's that, they're getting, and it's not just for SIM, even for a lot of the conferences, that people are in a sense, they're just overwhelmed, that bringing in people in could be a challenge.
Yeah, so how do you solve that? You're right, spot on is, especially some of the major cities like New York City, it's just, you can be out every night of the week, which is almost impossible. Maybe if you're single and that's all you do, a lot of people have family lives or things outside of the work. So how do you resolve that? How do you make sure that you still get that audience? Is it by providing a certain quality for these events or the content? What's your thoughts?
I think it's important, one, to have a mix, because certain people have different interests than others. Someone may be more early, they want to how to improve their leadership style and skills. Some people have technical questions. Some people just want to network. So they may need recruiting. So I think you want to have a mixture of programs. And if you look even at these, the number one factor in terms of having like a good chapter is the quality of the programs that they have. So you want to strong programs, mix up the venues. I mean, yes, it's good at some places, but people like seeing new events. We did a rooftop in New York a couple of months ago. We've been to vendor locations, Google, you understand. Just have a variety of events, and then make sure there's a community there. So people participate. You look at the most successful organizations, they have strong boards, strong committees, and they're getting to know each other on a deeper level rather than just going to the event, and then that's what they get more out of it that way. I think that's critical.
So how do you join, and who should you think should join? Who's it for?
Well, you have to be a qualified IT leader, and once you are, you can come in. If you are, and then you can't, I guess. But once you're in, like I've obviously shifted roles and I'm more in a consulting capacity now. But I think anyone that's really looking, and I would strongly encourage. I tell a lot of people, I invite them to different events we have and a lot of partner events. Go, try it, check it out. You may not like it, but at least you'll know. And I think it's someone who's just really looking, because so many IT leaders, it's just they're overwhelmed, and it's good to have a place to talk with people, get out, have a couple of drinks, and understand what you're going. And you find that a lot of people in the same boat as you, and I think it helps solve problems. You'll come across resources to help you deal with this. You may find talent, you may find new job opportunities, and I also think it's just going to make you more effective in your role and more satisfied.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's super interesting as these organizations evolve, and I'm sure when it was founded, 50 years ago, the environment was different, but it still carries the same fundamentals that today, providing that support and place for people to, like-minded individuals to get together.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a member of IAPP, it's Privacy Professional, which they have a number of great resources online, ISO, certified CISO, they all have different things but I think it's important. Reach out, see what's out there. In the case of SIM, you just look Society of Information Management. They have links, find a local chapter. They have national events as well, there's going to be one in Palm Springs. It's just, I think it helps. If you can get away, because if you're just in your office all the time and nothing but problems, your quality of life is going to go down.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me ask you this. Fast forward to today. You consult with organizations today, right? Are any particular, projects or consulting that you really enjoy and feel like they're a really good fit? Because sometimes it's all about a personal fit, even. Mm-hmm. What type of organization do you like to consult with? What type of project do you like to be involved in?
Well, I like a mix. I guess it's my personality. I said it a couple of times. I like dealing with smaller companies. You can, especially places which are a big mess, because you can have a big impact in a short. But you can, when you put a couple of things. Oh wow, this is amazing. However, the
baseline is low, right?
Exactly,
so
exactly.
You just go from there.
Exactly. But I like large companies as well, because they tend to have the best technology, new solutions. So especially if you're working with one like my primary, is that where they're really leading edge in a lot of respects, so it keeps you sharp. And then a lot of these things you can relay on to others in terms of how something is being done. So I think that's imperative to have a mix, because if you're in a specific sector, which is maybe got limited resources, I think, and this happens people in their careers as well, their skills can become stale. So I think it's important to have a mix, and also different sectors, because there's different risk profiles. And I understand certain, say pharma, for example, they don't want people with pharma experience. I remember I took one job, and this was at a retailer, one of the most famous retailers, and the CEO was like, look, why should I hire you? Because you have, limited to retail experience. I'm like, from what I understand, I told him, you have a lot of challenges here. That's exactly why you should hire me, because I'm going to take the experience and skills I have from working other sectors more mature and apply them, with quality, think it through where they can make sense here. And we were able to have an unbelievable impact.
Yeah, it's such a great answer. It really is, And then how is, for people, what's the easiest way for people to find you, get in touch?
LinkedIn, Erik Tomasi, ERIK-TOMASI. LinkedIn, always looking for new connections. I do a number of speaking, and I think, it's always great. The more people you meet, you learn something. Just don't push any more leads generation program. It's like half the thing on LinkedIn, and I'm sure you get the same thing.
God. I don't know what's in it with and it's funny because they apply the same malpractice to what it is they do. They obviously eat the same dog food that they sell, and you think, okay, well, if I hire you, you're going to do the same to potential clients of mine, and I don't like it. So if I don't like it, my potential clients are not going to like it.
Yeah, and the different entry point, like they position themselves as consultant. It's just lead generation. I get it, but no.
Yeah, but there's leads me to kind of an interesting question. It's like you see all those vendors out there, and they all some of them are all competing for the same budgets, and they're all trying to differentiate themselves and so on. And it's a noisy environment out there, right? What would you recommend to somebody like? Because some of them do hire. Unfortunately, do hire these lead generation companies.
Like, I don't have that much. That's one thing I don't have much experience on. I'd rather do like more networking. But I think if you want to just, and I'm going to like I did a talk recently for ISO about 27001. The new changes come with they stand, and it was a global event, and I really got people reaching out from all parts of the world, and I think that was a good connection. But coming back to your question on here. I think you just have to be distinct because I'm just overwhelmed how many emails I get and this and selling solutions and calls and that it's just you have to really value your time and try to put some constraints around it.
Yeah, and you're doing the right thing. We're doing this, so you struck me as a very authentic person, and I think a lot of times that's what people get is technology is a lot of people know technology, but I think it's that dynamics of dealing with someone. You want to deal with somebody you like and trust and is authentic, and you know that they're going to be able to deal with some of this stuff. And you definitely come across like that, and hopefully it came out from this conversation. And then, again, you're doing the right thing. People, I'm assuming, will reach out to you, or hopefully will reach out after viewing this session. But again, thank you very much for coming over. We had a tremendous conversation. I learned a lot, and hopefully we'll get to meet outside this, Vegas.